you all for a few minutes today about the book that Harvey and I wrote together. This was one of my very great pleasures, probably in my whole life, to get to work on a project with Harvey Cox. And we've had fun talking about it together on the radio and in sessions like this. So I will let Harvey speak to you about the Lamentations part. Harvey wrote a commentary on the book of Lamentations. I wrote a commentary on the Song of Songs. We wanted to call it the good news and the bad news. But I'll say a few things about the Song of Songs and what I was after and turn it over to Harvey. The Song of Songs, if you haven't read it lately, a very short book of poetry in the middle of the Bible, tucked away, just 8 small chapters. You could go home this evening and read it in a sitting. It is famous for what it includes and for what it leaves out. What it includes is some fairly erotic poetry. And what it leaves out is any mention of God at all. Its place in the biblical canon has been argued over, and Rabbi Akiva emerged in the 1st century as one of its great defenders. All scriptures are holy, Rabbi Akiva said, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. And, he went on to say, if you are singing it in the taverns, you will have no place in the life to come. And one of the things we learned from that, I think, is that people were singing it in the taverns. But in spite of this interesting mixture of elements and absences, presences and absences in this long poem, this poem inspired incredible devotion, has inspired incredible devotion over the centuries since the Bible was first put together. Bernard of Clairvaux, a Cistercian monk of the 12th century, wrote 86 sermons on the Song of Songs and barely got past the end of the 2nd chapter. Medieval Christians, in fact, commented more on the Song of Songs than any other book in the Bible. The power of this poem to produce new poetry, new theology, new thought is really incredible, unparalleled, maybe, among biblical books. For these passionate readers of the song, people who prayed it and memorized it and studied it and interpreted it, the Song of Songs was a key that unlocked all of Scripture. It was a garden in which one might meet God walking in the cool of the day. It was a text to be studied, memorized, prayed over, and prayed with, written on one's heart.
Now, in Judaism, in contemporary Judaism, the Song of Songs has a very lively liturgical life. It's sung to welcome the Sabbath. It's recited during Passover. It's alive and well. If you've ever been at the Western Wall as the Sabbath approaches, you've heard it sung. In Christianity, though, at least in my own branch of Protestant Christianity, the Song of Songs seems to have become primarily a quarry for wedding liturgies and not much else. As interpretation of the Bible moved from the medieval understanding of the Bible as packed with layers of meanings that could all be true at once, as we've moved from that way of understanding Scripture to focusing on what medieval interpreters called the historical or literal meaning of the text, the interpretations of the Song of Songs, which saw in it a song about the love of God for humanity or the love of Christ for the church, have become more and more difficult to make. And the Song of Songs, it seems to me, in my tradition at least, has been sidelined. The great American feminist Elizabeth Cady Stanton spoke for many modern readers when she said those allegorical readings of the song are pretty far-fetched and unworthy, she said, of the ideal Jesus. The Song of Songs, she wrote in her women's Bible, is merely a love poem by a young king to his harem. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, like other biblical scholars of her day, believed Solomon had written the Song of Songs. Scholars no longer believe this, but she saw Solomon is writing the Song of Songs when he was young and interested in his harem, Proverbs as he got a little older, and Ecclesiastes when he was at his wisest. Many Christians since the 19th century have come to view the song often as a kind of oddity, a little exception to the rule tucked away in there next to Isaiah. So when I was asked to join Harvey in this project and write a commentary on the Song of Songs, the question that I had was, can this song be recovered as a text of devotion for contemporary Christians without a wholesale allegorization of it? Can we, with our historical critical understanding of Scripture, which Bill has been studying here with us, can we pray this song? Can the breasts in the song remain breasts rather than becoming, the two books of the Bible, which is often how it was read? In another great interpretation of the song back in the 3rd century, the great interpreter Origen of Alexandria had this advice to give about the song. He said, "Join with the bride in saying what she says in order that you may hear what she heard." So what he was asking was for us to put ourselves in the woman's place in the song and to speak the words that she spoke, to pray them in order to hear from our beloved what she heard back. And something I won't say a lot about because I don't want to run out of time, but there are contemporary readings of the song that try to use the song to say heterosexuality is normative because here we have a man and woman in the song. The way the song was interpreted, though, over the centuries was in a very gender-bending way, with men putting themselves in the woman's place, and the interpretations were not always heterosexual. So if you have questions about that, we can certainly talk about that during the question and answer. It's an interesting part of the history of this song. I just want to mention 3 themes that I thought that emerged for me as crucial in understanding the song, and that seem to me worth meditating on and praying over in our own day. One, for Christians coming to the song, is a way to think anew about the Incarnation, the notion that God lived a human life, died a human death, lived in a human embodied life. The Song of Songs was read by Christians for a long time as about the Incarnation. Teresa of Avila in the 16th century, the great mystical writer, reads the first line of the song, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth," as a word about the Incarnation. That kiss, she said, is the kiss that God bestowed on all of humanity. It's the pressing of divinity into human flesh. So that's what she saw there. Another of my favorite readings of the song as helping us think about the Incarnation comes from Bernard of Clairvaux, our 12th century Cistercian monk. There's a beautiful passage in chapter 2 where the woman says, "Look, there's my lover. He's standing outside the wall of our house. He's peeping in through the lattice. He's looking in through the windows and calling to me." And in some rabbinical interpretations of the song, that's understood as God peering through the cracks in the western wall and looking out at God's beloved people. For Bernard of Clairvaux, the window was the human body, that God looked out, God was peering through the window of the body, peering through the lattice, that by taking on human life and human flesh, God looked out onto the world through a body, and as Bernard said, God learned mercy. This is very interesting to me because it's a reading of the Incarnation that is not just about God saving us or reaching out to us, but also God becoming who God is. God also being transformed through the experience of embodiment. And one last reading from my former colleague Diane Bergant in Chicago at the Catholic Theological Union, scholar of the Hebrew Bible. For her, she says, yes, the Song of Songs can help us think about the Incarnation, but we don't have to allegorize the poem in order to do that, because what the poem is about two people trying to love, trying to find each other, trying to be present to each other, trying to love each other across whatever divides them, and that human endeavor is a holy thing, that God is at the heart of the human endeavor, and the Song of Songs sings of that. So the Incarnation. Secondly, the vision of mutuality and love that the song upholds. One of the many unusual things about the Song of Songs is that in it, a woman speaks very clearly about what will please her sexually. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth is the first line of the poem. There are lots of stories in the Bible about women and sexuality, but they're usually sad stories. There are stories about women having very little control over their sexual lives. Sarah gets taken into the harem of the Pharaoh when Abraham is too afraid to claim her as his wife. Hagar gets sent by Sarah into Abraham's bed to produce an heir. Laban sends his daughter Leah into Jacob's bed when he swindles him out of his promised marriage to Rachel. Lot's daughters get offered to a group of rapists by their father. When the woman in the Song of Songs sings, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth," we are in some very different territory. Throughout the song, the lovers seem equally desirous of each other and equally vulnerable to the risks of loving each other. The movement of the lovers towards each other often depends upon the woman's initiative. She awakens and arouses her lover in chapter 8. The man waits for her invitation before he enters her garden of delights. Each seems to feel confident that he or she will be well cared for during their lovemaking. Each gazes at the other's body and catalogs each other's beauty. Throughout the song, they trade language back and forth, intensifying each other's images. They literally make the poem together. So the vision the song offers of two people on equal footing, loving each other, is certainly worth praying over and meditating upon in our day. And then finally, the theme that I think emerged as most important to me in working on this was the theme of unknowability. Because the Song of Songs is a song about love, it's also a song about separation and hesitation, missed meetings, vulnerability, misunderstandings, and the ache of absence. The song acknowledges over and over that no matter how intimate we are with each other, it's sometimes difficult for us to find each other, to meet each other, to recognize each other, to know each other. The lovers throughout the song ask questions like, "Where are you? Why can't I find you?" Or, "Who are you?" The man asks, "Who is this that looks forth like the dawn, fair as the moon, bright as the sun, terrible as an army with banners?" The women of Jerusalem, who play a sort of choral role in the poem, ask, "Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved?" Now, literary criticism of the Bible teaches us that these are rhetorical questions, that they're not real questions. They're questions that draw more attention to the lover being described. When the man says, "Who are you?" it's not because he doesn't know who she is. It's because he wants to help us see her even more clearly. He wants us to long for her as he does. But as I worked on the Song of Songs, I began to think that these are real questions, and that they represent the heart of what this poem is trying to say. And in many ways, for me, this is the theological meaning of the poem, that no matter how intimate we are with each other, we always remain mysteries to each other. The lovers in the song are so beautiful, and the poet makes us see them in all their shining glory. But the lovers are also more than their beauty and more than the sum of their glorious body parts that they each praise endlessly. And that more is both difficult to comprehend and describe, but that more is also the thing that is most precious. So praying the Song of Songs, studying the Song of Songs, reintegrating for Protestant Christians the Song of Songs back into our liturgical life might help us remember this, that even with those we know and love, there is always something, as Bernard of Clairvaux put it, farther out or farther in. Praying the song reminds us that what we cannot know about the other, about God, about ourselves, is as worthy of reverence and adoration as that which we do know. And when we learn to honor what's hidden in another person beyond our reach, we learn something about ourselves as well. For if even the most inaccessible parts of us can be loved, then maybe we are more than we believe ourselves to be. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and once more, congratulations to Bill Rayner. I assure you that what you're going to hear now is not going to be entirely good news. We started taking to calling each other, Stephanie and I, the good cop and the bad cop, working on this book together. But when you juxtapose these two texts, I think, this wonderful love song that she's recounted so beautifully, and this deeply tragic, angry outcry that you find in the book of Lamentations, something that neither one of them alone can bring out appears. So I learned a lot working with her. Who wouldn't take pleasure in working with Stephanie Paulsell on any book you can think of? We work together well, and I think we have learned something from each other. When is the last time you ever heard a sermon about the book of Lamentations? Think. It's probably a long time ago. The last time you heard a reading from the Song of Songs was probably at the last wedding you attended, because, as Stephanie said, it's often worked into wedding liturgies nowadays. Now, I think there's a reason why we don't hear very much about this book. It's an unremittingly tragic and angry book. This is a book written after the fall of Jerusalem, written from the depths of this broken and ruined city. It's about rape, it's about hunger, it's about exile, it's about starvation. It's about all these nasty kinds of things that happen when war occurs, and especially if you're on the defeated side. The first verse is not about kisses. The first verse starts out this way, although it does have a feminine reference. There's very little about kissing in the book of Lamentations. Starts out, how lonely sits the city that was once full of people. How like a widow she has become. She weeps bitterly in the night, tears on her cheeks, for among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. This is almost a kind of opposite side of the coin of the lovely poetry of the book of Song of Songs, because it's about all this negative material. But the other thing that one notices as you get into this text, as I did, I lived with it and thought about it for a long time as we wrote this book together, is that the style of its writing very well packages the mood of the book. It's a jumpy, kind of scratchy style, inconsistent. It's like hearing a person talk who's just lived through some kind of tragedy. And anybody here who's a minister, a rabbi, a priest knows that when something awful happens to you, when someone dies, there's an accident or an illness, one of the first things people do is say, why could God have done this to me? What could I possibly have done to deserve this? This is an underlying theme in this book. We don't know who the writer was. It's attributed by tradition to Jeremiah, Lamentations of Jeremiah. But if you study the history of this text, you know that in the original Hebrew version, that's not there. Somebody thought it might be nice in one of the translations to say, hey, this looks like something Jeremiah might have written. So that was included in the title, and it crept its way into the King James Version. Not true. Obviously, he didn't. Somebody wrote it, and there are some people who think that the person who wrote it might very well have been a woman. At least she knows very well the condition of women in a broken, ruined, occupied, defeated city, how awful life was for them. That's pretty clear. The writer didn't just make that up or didn't get it secondhand. It's all right there. So we don't hear much about Lamentations in sermons or in any other way, in part because I think, alas, the cultural God that has taken over in most religion in America today is a far, far friendlier, harmless, almost domesticated deity. A cuddly God, if you will. The God of the television evangelists who just wants to help you out, help you through your difficulties, help you find a parking place if you really need it. And he'll be especially helpful if you can be helpful to the evangelist and send in your contribution, preferably on a monthly basis. This friendly God, my friends, does not appear in the book of Lamentations. This is a God who the writer, a poet, is tempted to say is an assailant, not just absent, although that appears too, but an enemy. It's you who sent these troops in, who devastated our walls and broke down our temples and destroyed our altars. Why could you have done that to us? Why? Now, she knew pretty well the Deuteronomic rule. If you keep your side of the bargain with God, God will protect you. We must have done something wrong if God inflicted this punishment on us. But what could we possibly have done that's that wrong? So that we incurred all of this wrath and all of this punishment. Now, Bill Rayner said in his remarks that students here at the school, and I think he's right, all have one thing in common. They really want to make the world a better place in various ways, different approaches. They all want to do that. That's one of the wonderful things about teaching here. Maybe what this book does, among other things, is to bring you straight up against the nasty facts of just how much has to be done to make the world a better place. It is realism with a capital R. It's got the ugliness of life and not just the beauty in it. So it matches well, with Song of Songs. The poetry in the book, by the way, as I just said, has its own kind of jumpy quality. It's written in a kind of Hebrew verse in which one line is a little shorter than the next line, and then there's another line, it's a little longer, then a very short line. So it feels a little like you're riding along a bumpy road. And if anyone here has ever talked to someone who's just been in a catastrophe, like a tsunami or a flood, you'll know that they talk in a kind of incoherent way. They'll talk about something, then they'll go on to something else, and then they'll come back to the same subject, and they'll contradict themselves. This is what the book of Lamentations is like as well. It doesn't read in a continuous, beautiful flow. It reads like someone who's grabbed you by the lapels and is trying to tell you how bad things are and demand from you an answer about why things are that awful. Now, have I made it sound attractive enough that you'd like to go home and read it tonight? I suggest if you are inspired to read Lamentations and Song of Songs after our eloquent presentations here, you read Lamentations first. And then go to Song of Songs so you can at least have a comfortable ending and sleep better, because you may not sleep as well after having read Lamentations. So what good does it do? Why is it in the canon? Same question that Stephanie asked. Why did the rabbis keep this book, this erotic poem, which all the symbolization and metaphorization doesn't make any less erotic? Why? Why did they keep this book in? Well, I think there was a kind of wisdom that in order to understand God's workings in the world, you have to understand, in a sense, what God is up against. What God is up against. War and exile and deprivation. Women in this book in this awful book of Lamentations, in one verse it suggested, were forced to eat their own children because of the lack of food in the city of Jerusalem. A ruined city. It occurred to me as I read through this book also that if we have a single icon for this dreadful century that we've just left behind, the 20th century, just think, what would the picture be? It would be a number of pictures of decimated and ruined cities. The city, Hiroshima, the cities of Germany after the bombings, Stalingrad after the battle there, even bring it up to lower Manhattan after 9/11. The image of the devastated and ruined city is imprinted on us as the reality of the world in the 20th century, and maybe we're not quite out of it yet. Now, isn't there any hope in this book? Well, not very much. Once in a while, there's a little flicker. A verse pops up that says, well, God, look, there was a time in the past when you were faithful to us. Maybe there'll be another time when you will rescue us from our peril and our distress. But then it goes on to catalog further how awful things are. It isn't a book about how we should respond to tragedy and catastrophe. It's a book about how we really do respond. And in that sense, it's an all too human book, a documentation of the depths of human suffering. Human suffering inflicted by war, by conquest, by exile and deprivation, which is something we need to know about. Now, there is one theme I discovered. I haven't talked to Stephanie about this yet, but we will. The very thing that she ended her talk with does link it to some extent does link a Song of Songs to Lamentations. Because one of the touching parts of Song of Songs is the longing for the one who is absent, the lover who is absent. In this book, it is God who is absent. God is absent. Where are you when all this is going on? Your altars are destroyed, your temples are thrown down. Where are you? You have abandoned us. Now, there are some people who think that the cultural mood of our time as we move into the 20th century is not so much of atheism or agnosticism, but a sense of the absence of God. Not really there for us, not really there at all. It used to be simply an experience that the deepest mystics lived through, the dark night of the soul, they called it. Now it seems to be far more general. It's that to which we have to address our attention if we're trying to make the world better, if we're trying to bring a word of hope into despair. So it's important, I think, and I'm grateful that this book has been kept in the canon, and I only wish it were read a little more frequently. And now that we have this absolutely beautiful cover on the book, that maybe it will be. Hope springs eternal. Thank you.